Hello and welcome to the Way Out podcast, episode number 26. Andrew Logan here. Great to be with you as always. And I have a very special guest on today. He's joining me to have a bit of a candid chat, have a bit of an open chat about entrepreneurship. And he's a great speaker, a great trainer, and a great friend. I've had the honor of seeing him present on stage many times and the great honor of sharing the stage with him 4 or 5 years ago in Las Vegas, about 15,000 people, and he and I spent a bit of time on stage together, which was really, really cool. And I was in a rented suit, and there's a bit of a long story behind all that. But welcome to the call, Zach Slobin, mate. Thanks for being on.
Hey, mate. So good to be here, man. I've always just thought so highly of you, and I just appreciate your intelligence and your sophistication and the grounded demeanor that you bring to the world of business and finance. And I just love the diversity that you have in your career as well. And I've always just enjoyed our conversations, whether, for a few minutes or, being able to spend times backstage with you and your family. So it's just been great to, build a relationship over these last couple of years. And I'm, honored to be here with you and your community.
Well, mate, appreciate it. And yeah, as you said, I think the first time we actually properly met was backstage. I think we'd sort of, started on this path together, but in different countries. So Zach's American and I'm Australian, if you can't pick up on the accents. But
he's in advance.
I think we'd sort of watched each other from, social media circles and that, but then it got to meet backstage, which was really, really cool. But Matt, the reason I wanted to bring you on today and what I really wanted to discuss in today's episode is essentially, I know you have talked about it, and I know I've seen you speak many times, and you always say the line that you're kind of just pathologically unemployable, or like you're just physically not born to have a job. And I've always said something similar along the lines of, for a lot of people, their biggest fear is losing their job. And one of my greatest fears is ever having to get a job, like having to go back and just work, because just not built for it. And so I think when we look at entrepreneurship and we look at some of those, really, like obviously game-changing people, there's always a bit of a story of, struggle, and it can be a lonely road when you are that square peg in the round hole, and you don't always fit in places. So there's a lot of great things about entrepreneurship, and we love the roller coaster, but there can also be some struggles. So Matt, I'd love to just obviously open with a bit of your backstory so everyone can get to know you a bit better. But I know that's been a struggle for you at times as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm psychologically unemployable. I really struggle with being told what to do. Even to this day, when Eden, my wife, asks me to do the dishes or take out the trash, and she could be sweet as pie in asking, I still it feels like my skin is crawling. I don't know what it is about me, or if I'm, a few screws loose, which I'm sure that I am. It's part of the reason you say yes to entrepreneurship in the first place, is you got a few screws loose. But my journey really started when I was younger. I remember clearly being in school, and teachers would ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the other kids would say, well, I want to be a footballer, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a doctor, whatever it may be, I want to be a ballerina. And they said to me, Zach, what about you? And I said, look, I don't know what I want to do. I just know that I want to do a lot of things at one time. I just knew that I wanted to be involved and engaged in a lot of different opportunities. So from a very young age, I started seeking different ventures. And I started businesses as young as, 8 years old. I remember my brother and I would, sell candy bars to raise money for charity for the school. And the candy bar would be like $1, and we'd like mark it up by, $1 or $2 just to make a little bit extra money and things like that. So the charity got all of theirs. We were always the number one salespeople. So, it worked out well. But I was always looking for different ways to just find an edge in terms of making money alongside of traditional jobs, if you will. I just knew inherently that the way to create real wealth was through owning a business. Both my parents were small business owners. So I had that foundation and that modeling for me. And really, more than anything, as a young person, when I kind of took a look at the people who had the results in life that I was looking to create, none of them were employees. And that's not to say that I didn't learn things from people that had jobs, or during the time that I did spend a few months here or there with, kind of more traditional professional corporate roles. But I just knew it wasn't for me. And so by the time I'd reached college, I was already kind of playing with, what do I want to do after college? Okay, maybe I'll go the traditional route. And I did, actually. I graduated from college. I got into working in the professional sports world. But I was only there for about 5 or 6 months. And the reason I had to get out as quickly as possible is I remember vividly sitting at my computer one day and kind of looking out at the rest of the office and feeling like I was in the presence of a bunch of robots, quite frankly. I could see the life had just been drained out of all of these people just staring at their computers. And I said, I can't do this for the rest of my life. And I was 22 or 23 years old when I decided to really take a leap of faith. I moved to San Francisco. I started working as a consultant, having really no idea what I was doing whatsoever, but I was willing to fail, and I was willing to fail fast, and I was willing to fail hard. That failure led me to working with a woman who took me to the School of Hard Knocks to the tune of $200,000. I'd started a company with her. I was a arrogant, idiotic, young entrepreneur more than an entrepreneur by far. I didn't think twice when she offered me the keys to her castle. And after about 9 months of being in business with her, she wrote me a check for $200 and said, "Thanks, kid, you're out." And so that was my first real tough, brutal lesson in the world of entrepreneurship. And then from there, I found my way into network marketing. Company I started was gone in 6 months because the CEO took off with our money. I got into another company that was based in real estate investment education, which was great because I learned so much about real estate investment. But that was a company that was a $20,000 buy-in to get into. I had $300 in my bank account at the time, and I raised $20,000 so I could participate in that because I understood the importance of being resourceful. But again, it's kind of that madness mindset of being an entrepreneur, just kind of finding a way. And then that kind of just opened up my whole world. I started doing consulting and coaching, and I was one of the first people in the network marketing space to teach social media, if you will, way back in 2009, I think it was. And had a small online branding and marketing business for a couple of years where I was doing kind of done for you social media and whatnot. And then found my way to our current company, our current network marketing business, which I never thought I'd say yes to again. And it's been an 8-year incredible journey at this point. So there's a lot within the story. I also used to pay my bills by playing poker almost full time in between, little businesses that I was working on. So I don't know that there's an industry that I haven't at least dipped a toe in at this point in my 39 years of, being alive. But it's been a crazy, wild journey, and there's a lot that's happened within that. But that's kind of like the 50,000 foot view of my story, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I think it raises such a really good point in there. And we're talking two things particularly that are picking up from the story is you were never really driven by success. You weren't driven by money. You were driven by autonomy. And that's, to me, has always been the thing. And obviously in today's society, money allows you autonomy. And so money is part of the process to allow you to choose your own life. But that was a similar thing for me, where it wasn't that I didn't have work ethic. It wasn't that I couldn't be a good employee. I just always wanted to have my own autonomy. I wanted to be able to do the process myself. And so then we get to that next section where there's some lessons that only an empty bank account can teach you, right? And so I think there's safety, and there's safety in certain areas, and there's safety in jobs to an extent. And we've learned through a few, major things, the GFC particularly, and obviously COVID more recently, that sometimes that safety isn't always there that we think, but there can be the problem with safety essentially is that we're not learning some of those lessons. And, an empty stomach and a zero bank balance will teach you how to be very resourceful all of a sudden. You've really got to figure things out right. And I think that's the thrill of business as well, is that business is kind of just going from one problem to the next, to the next, to the next, but you learn and you problem solve. And so I think, as you said, some of the greatest lessons you learn in your 20s are then why you're so successful into your 30s. And that lesson and that experience, which would have broken most people, which would have said to most people, what, business isn't for me, I'll just settle. But you took those lessons and you turned them into success. So how do you grow resilience? Can you actually create more resilience in your life, or think people are just, inherently resilient and they are able to turn that failure into experience, which then comes to success?
I think it has everything to do. I think, first of all, I believe anything can be learned. I believe anything can be learned. And actually, for the most part, believe that everything is learned. Are there certain people who are born as superior athletes or just have a knack for musical talent or whatever it may be? Absolutely. But ultimately, did they have to put in the time and the dedication and the hours upon hours upon hours to establish that greatness? Of course. You look at like someone like Kobe Bryant or LeBron James or Michael Jordan, whomever may be. Yes, incredibly talented athletes, but the amount of work and failure that they had to experience to become who they ended up becoming in this world, you can't really argue with those results. And it's interesting as I listen to you talk about the choice between kind of the corporate world and the entrepreneurial world, and as I was kind of collecting my thoughts and getting grounded for our conversation today, I really had the thought of it really comes down to one of two things. You either have to be crazy enough to bet on yourself or crazy enough to bet on somebody else. That's really the distinction, right? When it comes to the world of entrepreneurship, you're saying if it is to be, it's up to me. And in the world of corporate, there's nothing wrong with having a job. Just to be very clear, I'm not interested in shaming anyone that has a job because it's important. You got to put food on your table. I've had jobs in my life and that's okay. But understanding that ultimately you're betting your future and your peace of mind at night on somebody else's decision making. And that's something I'm not entirely comfortable with. And then in terms of resiliency, going back to what I started before with, like, I believe that everything can be learned. And so to some degree, what we've had modeled for us in any instance of anything in life is going to have some sort of determination in terms of how we show up in life. And so I'm fortunate to have been raised by a mother who demonstrated for me day in and day out what resiliency looks like and how to handle resistance, and teaching me different philosophies and approaches to life so that I could learn to deal with resistance. And really learning to deal with resistance, I think, has less to do with how tough you are or being some kind of like alpha male or boss babe or any of that garbage that's out there these days, and more along the lines of what Jim Rohn always talked about, which is really what's your core philosophy to life? And how are you choosing to experience the challenges that you're having? And are you willing to look at failure as a necessary rite of passage, or are you looking at failure to be some sort of definition of who you are as a person? And I think those are the two things that people really confuse when they start into the journey of entrepreneurship, especially we see it all the time in network marketing, is they go, this is amazing, I'm going to crush this thing, I'm going to be great. And then all of a sudden, a month in, 2 months in, reality slaps them in the face that they have to learn some skills, they have to develop a new mindset. And now we get to find out who you are. And now we get to find out what your character is all about. Now we get to find out what kind of questions are you asking about your life and what it is that you want to create. Because really, if you're anchored into something emotionally that pulls at you so incredibly much, then resistance becomes something that you actually fall in love with. Resistance becomes something that you look forward to. Resistance becomes something that you actually start to understand as a necessary way for you to start to develop the strength that is actually required to go the distance as an entrepreneur. And the reality is, to go the distance as an entrepreneur, one, you have to be batshit crazy, excuse my language. And two, you have to have the skin of a crocodile. You do, or an alligator. You have to have such thick skin. But how is it then that you develop that thick skin? Is you got to be willing to put yourself into an environment where failure is going to occur. And so going back to the poker playing days, and this would go for most poker players, like, Joe Hashim, great Australian world champ, right? He would tell you the same thing. It's highly unlikely that Joe Hashim remembers most of the hands that he won. But I'd be willing to bet he can tell you most of the big hands that he lost. And I'm the same way. Same thing when I was a goalkeeper, when I played, soccer, right? It was the same thing. I can't tell you too many of the great saves that I made. I can tell you for sure a couple of the ones I wish I could have had back. Because those were the times where I really took a moment to really reflect and really study, and how could I have done this done this differently. And where I will say that resilience really kind of stems from, if you want to learn how to create resilience, is it really starts with personal responsibility and accountability, right? That's really where you build that thick skin, is kind of taking a look at things and going, okay, what's the part of this entire experience and this event that just occurred that I'm actually responsible for?
Yeah, the mirror test is an ugly test at times, isn't it? But that's the reality. We have to look in the mirror every day and say, like, everything that is in my life and everything that isn't in my life is a direct reflection of the decisions I've made and my commitment. And I know Ryan Halliday has a great book, The Obstacle is the Way. Like, if you do love reading, and just the great thing is, you say that if there's an obstacle in your place, that's the world showing you what skill you need to learn next, isn't it? I was laughing there before, but because I think in between playing AFL and rugby, I think I played about 8 grand finals and I lost one. And I can only remember the one I lost, and because I was the goal kicker for the rugby team, and I missed a couple of conversions and we lost by a few points. And so that 20 years on, it still lives with me, that what failure. But I think and we were talking about it before, and I remember hearing once, and it was just one of those little phrases that always sticks with you. Experience, success comes from experience, and experience comes from making good decisions, and good decisions come from making bad decisions. And so that I've made a lot of bad decisions in my life, but that's sort of the reality again, isn't it? That we have to go through that crucible of failure. And that's where we're forged into creating the skills if we have the resilience to keep going through.
Yeah, I just think that this idea that business should be different than any other thing that we experience in life is absolutely absurd. Like, what other area of life do you just fall into something, it's easy, and then you're not bored out of your mind? I mean, imagine again being an athlete and you put on your jersey and the referee's like, congratulations, you won the game because you put on your jersey. I mean, that wouldn't be very exciting. No, the reason we put on the kit is so that we can walk onto the pitch, look at the other team, evaluate whether or not they're going to kick our asses that day, and then either way, just get into it and go fight and play to win. And I think that, if you were always able to just have it come easily, it would get boring to some degree. Like you want to feel that way. You want to feel like you put in a good workout. You want to feel like you left it all on the field. I had amazing coaches in sports in my life, and they said, look, we want to win and we're going to play to win. But at the end of the day, what's most important to me is your uniform just covered in dirt when you walk off the field. Can you cross that white line and look back and go to sleep at night and put your head down and say, I left it all on the field? And that's what it's got. And that's got to be the same attitude, is no matter how hard you get hit, no matter what happens in life, there's got to be a willingness to say, I'm going to lace them up again. I'm going to lace them up again. And I'm just going to keep going until, and I've had moments in my life, and you've heard my, the deeper parts of my story, of course, where, I've been broke more than once. Being broke was the least of my concerns. At some point, I learned how to deal with it, right? You learn how to stretch $20 in amazing ways when you're really struggling and starving. But there were also times where I was, borderline suicidal, dead broke, living on my mom's couch. And you have to find something to anchor into. And I know for me, like you talked about in the beginning, that term autonomy, the idea of freedom, the ability to do whatever I want, whenever I want, wherever I want, with whomever I want, was always enough to keep me going. Because the question I had asked myself was, what's more painful? Conforming, pushing myself back into the box, going back to living a safe, predictable, in the lines life, or the pain of laying on my deathbed and wondering what could have been had I actually pursued and kept going and fought back in my life. And that to me has always been my greatest fear. The number one regret of the dying is they look back on their life and wish they hadn't listened to as many people and they'd pursued more of their dreams. That's terrifying to me. And I studied philosophy in college, and the Greeks had a term called eudaimonia, and it meant being able to look back on your life before you're about to pass on and know that it was a life well lived, that you pursued prosperity, that you experienced happiness, that you had incredible relationships, that you took care of your body, that you had money in the bank, that you really felt like you, again, left it all on the field. And so when people are like, oh, I'm scared of rejection, or I'm scared of what my parents will think, or, what do my coworkers say, or this, that, or the other, it's like, look, at the end of the day, when you're laying on your deathbed, you're going to be having a conversation with one person and one person only. What do you want that conversation to look like? And to me, that was always enough to get me out of bed and keep me going.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So moving into sort of business, as we're talking about it, and people get, when the entrepreneurship and the thing with, and both of us from the network marketing industry, but entrepreneurship in general, there is that little bit of back to front where you essentially create a business and then you go and learn the skills. Whereas I went to university, learnt the skills, got the degree, so that then I could go and, be an employee, but then essentially get into small business. And again, loved my time in small business because I learnt so many things. And one of the biggest things I learned when you were talking earlier was, once I got into small business, that's when the big boy pants had to come on, because if the business wasn't successful, it wasn't just, okay, well, that was a bad luck, your credit card's maxed out, but bad luck. I would then have to lay off a heap of employees. So all the people who came to work for us, my partner and myself, we're betting on us being successful. And so that mindset, and I learned that because I went into small business at like 25. And of course at 25, you know everything, and maybe you don't, and you make a lot of bad decisions, which lead to experience, which lead to good decisions, which lead to success. But from there, it was a matter of like, I have to step up, because if we're not successful, then all these other people may not be able to pay their bills next week because they don't have a job anymore. And they're relying on that, and they're relying on me. And so we took that same mindset into our network marketing business. And it was like, it wasn't just, oh, well, if this doesn't work, then, oh, well, no worries, we'll go. These people have come in with a bet on us, essentially. They have trusted us and they've come in. So our business is based on their success. And so we find that, as you say, like people come into entrepreneurship with great ideas and great business ideas, but then they learn the skills afterwards. And that's why we see so many people quit, right? Because the reality hits. Like, hang on, I've actually got to do something. Like, what do I do now? But it's in that process that you learn the skills to take you on the journey, right? But it's in reverse. It's in reverse to what we're taught.
Yeah, it's fire, ready, aim, right? It's fire, ready, aim. And that's kind of the thing. But it's also really a foundational kind of essence to so many entrepreneurial minded people is really, that it's better to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission. And it's kind of that same idea, of, okay, cool, I'm going to jump off the cliff and try and figure out how to make a parachute on the way down. And if I can't figure out how to make a parachute, I'm going to figure out how to fly. And if I can't figure out how to fly, I'm going to figure out how to fly over to some other guy that, is also parachuting down that I can tandem with, or whatever it may be, right? So that's part of the deal. But it's like you said, is we kind of, in our minds, we get into business and we see the end results. And in our minds, it's a straight line. And what happens is we get started, and usually getting started, because there's so much really adrenaline, we're looking at steps A, B, C, and we're moving along, and everything's kind of coming along smoothly. Nothing can go wrong. And all of a sudden you hit D, and D doesn't look the way that you thought it was going to look. And that's where most people get stuck and revert backwards, because what they don't realize is that they've just found out that they have absolutely no idea what they're doing. And that's really where the journey begins, is we start, and Tony Robbins has talked about this for years, we start in this place of really what's called unconscious incompetence. Like, we just don't know what we don't know. And so we say yes, and we get in, and we jump, and we are ready to rock. And then as we get into the journey, like you're talking about, and we realize we have to learn some skills, we actually now become what's called consciously incompetent. So now I'm aware that I suck at this, basically. Now I'm aware that I suck at this. So that's really where you start to see kind of, the difference between people that are really serious and the people that really just aren't cut out for this life, is when they kind of become aware of, I'm not good at this, I'm going to quit, versus the person that's really connected to the establishment of a new identity. They say, no, I'm going to keep moving forward. So they keep moving forward. Now they become what's called consciously competent, because they've practiced so much and they've put in so much time, like you have, for example, to learn the skills of a business, to become productive, to be a responsible leader or business person or whatever it may be. And now you're consciously competent. But that's the part, believe it or not, where a huge percentage of people also tend to fail and quit, because what starts to happen is they become arrogant. And they think that they've learned everything there is to learn. And so when they start to face more resistance on their way up to that new identity, because what I've learned in my experience is the closer we get to a new identity, the more the old identity starts to scream for its life, people start to revert back. But the real key is, if you can kind of push through that resistance from conscious competence, you become what's called unconsciously competent. And that's why you have the ability to get in the car, drive, 50 kilometers or whatever it is, and arrive at your destination and not even realize that you had driven them. And I'm sure you've had that experience, right? Where it's kind of like, wait a minute. Well, how did that happen? I literally just drove this huge machine that carries life or death with it, driving, I'm going to get the speed off here, but 75 kilometers an hour or whatever it is, or 100 kilometers an hour. And I'm so programmed, I'm so automatic at doing it, because I've done it so many times in my life, that I'm unaware that I was even doing it, because it becomes a part of who you are. And that's really learning to bridge that gap, to move from the inherited identity, what we're born into, the religions that we're taught, the lessons that we learn, the parents that we have, the religious teachers that we're exposed to, whatever it may be, all that conditioning is what solidifies that early identity. But if we want to create a new result, we've got to create a new identity. And in order to take that journey, we're going to have to slay some dragons. We're going to have to slay some dragons. That's why study Joseph Campbell and study the hero's journey. And I guarantee you'll find yourself somewhere along that arc, because it is a necessary rite of passage. And at the same time, again, your life philosophy and your approach to that rite of passage can either be painful or to some degree enjoyable. And I love that you brought up the example of a roller coaster, because if you watch people ride a roller coaster, there are two kinds of people. Okay. I'm actually the opposite on roller coasters than I am in real life. So, because I'm not an adrenaline junkie. But if you watch people ride roller coasters, two types of people. There are the people like me who, this is the worst thing in my life. Please get me off this thing, terrified, freaking out, green in the face, right? And then there's the other type of people. What are they doing? Hands up in the air. This is the greatest ride of their lives. Well, when it comes,
it's not enough. They've got to do it with no hands, right?
That's right. Like they're trying to take off their seatbelt and the whole deal, right? And so entrepreneurship is the same way. That roller coaster, it's a personal philosophy. Are you holding on for dear life, not trusting yourself, not trusting the ride, not trusting the vehicle, or are you completely surrendered? Trying your best to enjoy every phase, embracing the learning, sinking into what you don't know, expanding who you can become. And those little nuances, those little questions, that self-reflection is what opens all that space to create a new identity. But if we don't learn to ask ourselves new questions and we don't learn how to take responsibility, we'll constantly feed that old identity. And we'll always feel like we're taking 2 steps forward and 5 steps back, because that old version of ourselves, that old identity, it is going to pull and pull and pull. So going back to what you and I talk about so often, that skill development, that putting yourself in the fire, stepping into the ring every single day to practice is the only thing that's going to allow you to then start to build that level of confidence to become consciously competent and then say, okay, I'm 1 step away from having a completely new identity. And that's really where the juice is in that process, if you will.
I talked in my last podcast episode, and it's funny again that you bring it up, but I was talking about the crypto markets at the moment, and essentially, in Wall Street, in the short term, like stocks, commodities, currencies, whatever it is, in the short term, it's an emotional valuation. What is the emotion of the market as far as FOMO, greed, and that? And then in the long term, it's about the value that you bring to the marketplace. So we see the dot-com boom, we see all those things were emotionally exciting, and there's going to be cryptos that were emotionally exciting. And then we realized actually it was a meme about a dog. Maybe that wasn't like the best investment strategy in the long term, right? But I mean, who knows? Again, it's a speculation, and we're betting that, one will survive over the top of the others. But that same process is then in everything we do, as you say, because we come into business and we get excited. And we are just excited, and we're based on emotions. We've started working with people that excite us. We're using products that excite us, but we don't actually know what we don't know. And then we hit that dip, right? And I talk about it all the time, is that the dip is where we actually find out who is willing to then learn the skills, who is willing to go through that furnace, and who is actually you know what, that was fun. Kind of now onto the next thing. And I say it, especially from the investment point of view, it's funny, you were talking about before, I have that same paradox where I am an adrenaline junkie. I do love to jump off things and jump out of things because I'm scared of heights. So I'm not great with heights. So I go out of my way to jump off things to try and face that fear. But also when it comes to investing and when it comes to business, I'm incredibly vanilla. I'm incredibly habitual. I'm incredibly just do some fundamental things. And I don't try and get my kicks out of the stock market. I try and just be very, very reliable in the stock market. So I get a reliable income. So then I can go and jump off planes in New Zealand or something like that. It's that paradox that financial freedom comes from being quite mundane and boring and habitual and having habits and having a budget and those things. So then you can go and do the freedom afterwards. But if we try and get our kicks out of business, it's not always going to be there, only in the short term, right? We can't go into business for the emotional excitement because it's only going to last so long.
It's so funny that you bring that up. We have one of our partners is here staying with us for a couple of days, and her and I were talking, and that exact conversation came up. She said, I just feel a little bit kind of like she's been in her network marketing business for about a year now, has a great business, off to a great start, doing really well. And she says to me, she goes, I just kind of feel, I feel a little bored. And I said to her, with all due respect, you haven't been doing this long enough to feel bored. You haven't. And the truth of the matter is that eventually one day you will get bored. And that boredom is your freedom. That boredom is your ability to do things like you're saying, Andrew, to take yourself and do what you find exciting. I'm totally fine just kind of putting in the time I have to put in and create the leverage that I get to create so that I can live my life the way that I want to live it. And if some of those activities aren't the most exhilarating things in the world, then whatever. But I don't think that there's a singular career in the entire world where you're not going to find some function of, boredom from doing the same thing in and out for years and years, no matter what you do. So I think, I don't know, I'm all about it. Like, please, like I'm fine with boring. Boring is fine because I get my kicks off elsewhere. Like you. I'm not going to jump off a plane with you, but
Well, as I said, I do it because I don't enjoy it. Like, don't enjoy it.
I'll get out of my comfort zone in other ways, mate. I'm not.
Matt, I think, coming up to the end of the time, and I greatly want to appreciate and respect your time, and thank you for coming on. Guys, if you want to follow Zach, he does, absolutely amazing work on his social media. He adds so much value. I was thinking just earlier, again, when I was thinking about our conversation, I've agreed with every single thing you've ever posted, except for the time that you said Ozark is better than Breaking Bad. And I think, like, at that point, it was... I was almost going to unfollow, man. I think
I have to ask you a question.
Such a controversial opinion.
Okay, I have to ask you a question, and I hope you tag him in this. Rob Sperry, did you tell Rob that you were interviewing me, and he said I need you to challenge Zach on Breaking Bad?
I didn't, but I do remember Rob commenting.
Yeah, we have a big beef about this.
Yeah, I do remember the conversation going on there. But I do have Rob we're lined up for a chat in a couple of weeks, actually, just once he gets back from Hawaii. So I will bring it up on that one for you. But no, Matt, I appreciate it. And guys, so you can reach him at Instagram at Zach Sloban or on Facebook, Zach Sloban. It's obviously there's probably not too many Zach Slobans out there, so I'm sure the name will show up. Unlike there's a lot of Andrew Logans I've discovered in the world. Mate, thank you so much for your time. And guys, thanks for being on. And I will see you on our next episode.
Thanks, mate.